Life with Jesus is meant to transform every corner of our lives. But often, the old ways of life creep in and distort how we engage with God and with others. Paul writes the 2 letters to Corinth to deal with the chaos and confusion in the church. Paul had visited this city in his second missionary journey, which you can read about in Acts 18. And after Paul had left, he had received a report that there are divisions in Corinth. So he writes 1 Corinthians to encourage unity and purity. The first letter to the Corinthians is different from any other letter Paul writes. Rather than a prolonged argument, it reads topically, as if he jumps from one short essay to the other. He addresses divisions, as you can see on your chart, in chapters 1 through 4. Issues of sexuality and lawsuits in 5 through 7. And how they ought to worship and not worship in 8 through 14, dealing with things such as food and idols, gender distinctions, and the Lord's Supper, and spiritual gifts. And finally, Paul discusses the resurrection of the dead in chapter 15 and the collection he's hoping to gather for the suffering Jerusalem church in chapter 16. Corinth is a mess. There are divisions, sexual immorality, lawsuits, table fellowship problems, and disorderly worship in the church. Some are sleeping with temple prostitutes, while others are saying all sex is wrong. Paul says the gospel applies to every corner of their lives, from who they sleep with, to what they eat, to what they wear. Paul then writes another letter to Corinth after he has sent a severe letter to them. In 2 Corinthians, Paul defends his ministry, arguing that his suffering and weakness and change of travel plans doesn't disqualify his ministry, they actually qualify him. His hardships display God's power. He boasts in God's strength through his weakness, because through his weakness, the power of the gospel is displayed, just like at the cross. The first 7 chapters, as you can see on your chart, concern Paul's integrity despite his absence from them. The middle portion of 2 Corinthians, chapters 8 through 9, is about the collection he hopes to gather from them for the church in Jerusalem. And then finally, in chapters 10 through 13, Paul changes his tone with them and asserts his authority because some can't be reconciled to Paul and they're listening to false teachers. The gospel message, according to Paul, changes every part of our lives. It transforms how we interact with one another and how we interact with God. I hope you will join me as we study the Corinthian letters.